So welcome again. We are going to start up on the next English section. I'm just knocking it through. It's a pretty long section, honestly, on the ACT, but we will get through it. So passage 3, the pottery of Mata Ortiz. In the early 1950s, a 12-year-old boy named Juan Quezada gathered firewood in the mountains near the village of Mata Ortiz in Chihuahua, Mexico. All right, I'm doing my best with these Spanish pronunciations, so I probably sound like Alex Trebek from Jeopardy. He always kind of overdoes it. I think it's a little bit of fun. So, boy named Juan Quezada. This name is supposed to be a little bit of like an adjectival phrase, right? This whole thing is going back to describe boy here. So I know that I need, there can't be a comma here because named Juan Quezada should be all the same sort of thing, right? So definitely not the comma in there. So a 12-year-old boy named Juan Quezada gathered firewood. So right now, the subject and verb of this sentence are boy and then gathered. So the general rule on these tests, and indeed in the English language in general, is that you want the subject and the verb to be right next to each other. The one exception to that would be if you, one exception to that would be if you have two commas on either side of it. So you could do subject, comma, some stuff, and then verb. So here, if we had boy, comma, named Juan Quezada, comma, gathered firewood, that would be one option. But none of these gives us that option, right? We either have a comma in right after boy, or we have a comma right after Quezada. And there's nothing, there's none that gives us both options. So that basically means that the name Juan Quezada doesn't need commas, and it's just going to end up being B in this case, rather than C or D. Though he dreamt of becoming an artist, Quezada spent all of his free time selling firewood to help support his family. In the mountains, Quezada found shards of pots and an occasional complete pot, painted with intricate red and black designs. Okay. Which of the following alternatives to the underlined sentence would not be acceptable? Okay, so we're looking for something that would not work. So pots, along with an occasional complete pot. Okay, this is basically testing appositives. So appositives are little descriptors that appear between dashes or commas or parentheses. And all these little descriptors go back to describe something or elaborate on something. So here it says shards of pots, and it could be an occasional complete pot. So commas are good. The thing about these is that these have to be paired. So 2 dashes is fine, 2 commas is fine, 2 parentheses is fine. Here I've got 2 dashes, that's okay, 2 commas, that's okay, 2 parentheses, good, but the difference between H and J, notice that these both use parentheses, is that in H we have an additional comma, and this is like a belt and suspenders sort of mistake, right? Where you don't need a comma if you already have the parentheses, because the parentheses do a good enough job of marking it as an appositive. So H will not be correct here. Moving on, these were artifacts from his ancestors, the Poquime, or Casas Grandes Indians, who lived in the area from about 8100 to 1400. Fascinated by the geometric designs, Quezada wondered if he could make pots like these. Okay, so this comma is a little bit out of place here. This has to do with quoting direct speech and quoting indirect speech. So if Quezada wondered, can I make pots, etc., etc., that's something where we need a comma to set that off. But if you're doing reported speech where you're saying, oh yeah, he wondered if he could make those pots, you do not need a comma there. So because they're doing indirect speech, definitely nothing with a comma. So we're down between B and C. So what's the difference? Wondered if you can make pots like these. Wondered if you can make pots like these. So again, it's totally reasonable for him to ask, can I make pots like these? But this is not direct speech. It's not quoting his speech, right? It's indirect speech. So it's actually going to be B in this case. So he's wondering if he can make pots like those. Just describing something that he's doing. You don't need commas. You don't need quotes. You don't need a question mark. He dug the clay, soaked it. Oh, actually, hold on. Okay, 34 is asking about transition. So which of these following true statements would provide the best transition from the preceding of this paragraph? So for transitions, you want to see what the previous paragraph is about and what the next paragraph is about. This paragraph is like, okay, Quezada found all these cool pots, and he was thinking, maybe I can make those types of pots. This one is about digging the clay, figuring out how his ancestors did stuff. He's basically like, yeah, now he's making the pots. So thinking about making the pots to making the pots. We're looking for a transition there. So the village of Mato Ortiz is only 3 streets wide, but stretches for a mile between the Casas Grandes River and the railroad tracks. Obviously not about pot making. Patterns of Mato Ortiz pottery that Quezada admired are based on the techniques of the ancient Paquime. Okay, that's at least talking about the pots, right? So let's keep that in maybe. Quezada began working with the clay from the mountains. Okay, this actually talks about him working on pots, so this is my favorite so far. Quezada's painting designs became increasingly complex. So we only get to Quezada painting his designs like way down here. So probably we do not want to pick J here, right? So we actually just want to do H. Quezada began working with clay from mountains. So then this talks all about how he's working with the clay, blah, blah, blah. We already read that. As an adult, Quezada found a job with the railroad, but always made time for his art. By 1976, he was selling pots to travelers and had taught several members of his family how to make pots. Okay. I'll finish the paragraph. 3 of Quezada's pots were discovered in a junk shop in New Mexico by anthropologist Spencer McCollum, who at first thought they were prehistoric. Okay. He was selling pots to travelers and had taught several members of his family how to make pots. It's not too unreasonable, right? He was selling and had taught. So, again, we're looking for the correct tense. This is like past perfect, right? Was selling and taught. So that's reasonable. A dedication to teaching? Definitely not. A teacher of? No. It should be some sort of like parallelism, right? He's selling and teaching, basically. Has taught is the only other one. But because this would be is selling pots and has taught? By 1976, so this should be past perfect tense. It's like, okay, 1976 is in the past, but this teaching is in the past compared to 1976. So rather than has taught, you want had taught. You know, he'd already taught his family these techniques before 1976, rather than teaching them in 1976. So it's going to be had versus has taught. This is a little bit of a tricky one, especially for non-native speakers. So past perfect versus, oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Past perfect versus past? Simple past? Anyways, whatever. Basically has versus had taught. 3 of Quezada's pots were discovered in a junk shop in New Mexico by anthropologist Spencer McCollum, who at first thought they were prehistoric. Okay. In the preceding sentence, the clause, who at first thought they were prehistoric, primarily serves to indicate. Okay. So, clearly McCollum thought that they were at first that they were prehistoric. So that must mean that Quezada did a pretty good job of making them look like the Casas Grandes pots. How closely Quezada has created his pots within the Piquime tradition sounds right. His technique wasn't well developed yet, not exactly. How strikingly simple, again, not exactly. That the style of Quezada's pots was outmoded, again, like, I guess that's kind of right, but outmoded suggests it's just a fashion that changed with times. This is supposed to be like an ancient technique that he's picking up on. He's an anthropologist, so it makes sense, right? His search for their creator led him to Mato Ortiz in an eventual partnership with Quezada. Okay, so his search led him versus led himself, lead, led, right? So you have to know the past tense of leading, right? Leading, like being a leader, having someone follow you somewhere. So the search led him, it will be LED, and then led him versus led himself. So the search did not lead himself because the search is operating on actually Spencer here, right? The search is leading Spencer. It's not that Spencer is leading himself, so it's going to be A. And an eventual partnership with Quezada. Which choice most strongly suggests that Quezada's partnership with McCollum was not formed right away. So not formed right away is kind of our key phrase. So eventual, I mean, yeah, right? It doesn't happen right away. It takes some time to do, so no change is looking pretty good. Circumstantial does not talk about time. Momentary, it says it's just like for a short amount of time, not that it takes time to develop. And then timely is also not saying that it doesn't happen right away. Timely is just like it's appropriate time, basically. McCollum showed Quezada's pots to art dealers in the United States, the places in which art galleries were soon offering Quezada thousands of dollars for them. Okay, pretty sure it's not that. That doesn't make sense. Generally, if you see the option delete, you want to see if that is possible, because those are usually the best answer if you can do them. So let's see if that works. McCollum showed Quezada's pots to art dealers in the United States. Art galleries were soon offering Quezada thousands of dollars for them. So that at least makes it into 2 legible sentences, but then it's trying to join it with a comma, right? So we can't have that because we would have 2 complete sentences, and if we're doing that, we have to join it with a semicolon, comma and, or period and capital letter. And it would happen there that art galleries were soon offering Quezada thousands of dollars for them. This is grammatically okay with the comma and connecting 2 complete sentences, but it's unnecessarily wordy. It would happen there that, right? Where could also work. You have the comma here. The where makes the second part a non-independent sentence, and it's less verbose, so it's going to be this C option. Quezada helped his village with the money here in selling pottery, but he wanted to do more so. No, not that. More than that, no. So the then, THEN, cannot work. More than that with a THAN might work. Then talks about timing. Then is the comparative between 2 things. He wanted to do more of them. The them is really unclear what is actually meant there, so it's going to be more. So he taught people from Mata Ortiz to make pots. Today there are more than 400 potters around, all of which make their pots by hand following the traditions of the Pekime Indians. Okay. Today there are more than 400 potters around. 400 people creating art now. 400 potters in Mata Ortiz. Or delete and place a comma after 400. Okay. Ooh, this is kind of a tough one. So let's talk about the delete, right? If you can do the delete, generally you want to try to do it. Place a comma after word 100. Today there are more than 400, all of which make their pots by hand following the traditions of the Pekime Indians. So we taught people from Mata Ortiz how to make pots. Today there are more than 400. Okay, this doesn't quite work, and why it doesn't work is because the 400, if you don't have the thing that they are, it's a little ambiguous whether the 400 refers to the people or whether it refers to the pots. So it's okay to use, pronouns as long as it's very clear what the antecedent of that pronoun is, what the word is that that pronoun is replacing. 400 people creating art now, 400 potters in Mata Ortiz, more than 400 potters around. So Mata Ortiz is probably better than around because it's more specific. And then people creating art now versus potters in Mata Ortiz. People creating art now is, again, very undescriptive. So it's going to be potters in Mata Ortiz because you need that level of specificity about what we're actually talking about. Okay, and then all of which make their pots by hand. So the which doesn't work here. We're talking about people, so you want a who or a whom, right? And then what's the difference between who and whom? So usually the who versus whom. Since we're talking about a bunch of people here, you can think of a they versus them sort of thing. They versus them. So if I were to try to replace the who versus whom there, by the way, the them is, okay, we should talk about the them because that could be a trap answer, but it's definitely not going to be the which, because you need a personal pronoun. So all of them make their pots by hand following the traditions. The them doesn't work there because that would make this second thing an independent sentence, and then you would not be able to use the comma here. You would need a semicolon. Okay, that aside. Who versus whom? So all of they makes their pot by hand? No, that doesn't sound right, right? All of them make their pots by hand, right? So them matches whom, they matches who, so it must be whom. Whom works if you have the object of a preposition, which is what you have here, of whom, of them, exactly. The village is thriving, and many museums proudly display the pottery of Mata Ortiz. Each artist brought something unique to their creations, to his or herself's creations, to hers or his creations, to his or her creations. Okay, hers or his is a pronoun that it basically assumes that you already know what you're talking about. So hers creations does not work there because you're specifying that it is the creations. Their is they are, not the plural possessive. Plural possessive should be THEIR, so it won't be a. It must be his or her creations. For the sake of logic and coherence of this paragraph, sentence 5 should be placed. Okay, each artist brought something unique to their creations. So let's see where we're going here. So there must be referring to the potters, right? So at the very least, we have to have introduced that we're talking about potters. He taught people from Ortiz to make pots. Today there are more than 400 potters, all of whom make their pots by hand. So I think it's clear that it has to be sometime after sentence 3, I would say, right? So let's see, it can't be before sentence 1 because it's not introduced that we're talking about potters. It can't be after sentence 1 because it doesn't talk about the potters yet. After sentence 2. So we taught people from Mato Ortiz to make pots. Okay, again, no, because we haven't talked about them actually making the pots and specifying like who is doing this. It's more than the 400 people. So it's got to be where it is now. Even though I think you can make an argument for going after sentence 3 rather than after sentence 4. But that's not an option here. 45 asks about the preceding passage as a whole. Suppose the writer's primary purpose had been to write an essay summarizing the history of pottery making in Mexico. Would this essay accomplish that purpose? Okay, so summarizing the history of pottery making. So my initial thought is like, no, this doesn't really do that. It talks about one guy and his rediscovering of an old technique and then application of that technique to commercial success, basically. So I'm skeptical of the yeses. Let's look at the no's first. No, because it focuses instead on one artist, based his creation on ancient pottery techniques and share those techniques with other artists. So that's exactly what I think it should be. No, because it focuses on describing the Casas Grandes culture in ancient Mexico. No, it talks about the pots that they make, but mostly it talks about quezada. Yes, because it discusses ancient pottery shards and complete pots from the Paquimia Indians and compares that pottery to modern designs. It does not compare it to modern designs, really. Yes, because it just demonstrates the quality of the ancient pottery of the Mato Ortiz. Nope, it describes broadly what it looks like. That's about it. Okay, that's another section down. I'm kind of going through these quicker and quicker just because we have, I've already introduced the primary concepts, and so probably you guys are kind of sick of it at this point. So we're going to keep blowing through this until we're all the way done. There's not that many passages left, so stick with it, and good luck. Chase that 36. Stay savvy. You know the drill.